Hey community, welcome to our sermon podcast for wanderers, seekers, and thinkers, for deconstructing and reconstructing. This is a feed of Open Door Church, a faith community focused on God's love and grace, a progressive church built around action, community, and people. Enjoy this week's message and check back often as we're posting new content every week. We've been discussing dialogue. Figure we'll continue that, and as a word of warning, maybe this brings you back, or maybe you go, I could skip that. Next week we're going to practice, because we've been talking about it a lot, and that seems odd to talk about dialogue and then not do it. And so next week we're going to practice and run our own little dialogue here. Yes, yeah. We'll have some guiding questions. It'll be small groups, which is uncomfortable for some of you. Sorry. And some guiding questions with some things hopefully that create differences of opinions that we can work on the skill of not having the answers necessarily. So that's been the driving force of this conversation, and really, as with many of our series over the last 2 years, one of the things that has driven this question or this series or whatever has been looking out into the way that we communicate with one another, and way the world, I think, has changed over the last few years in terms of the way we relate to each other and have conversation and kill relationships over opinions on politics or religion or different things. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to an inability for us to have differences of opinion and our need to have the right answers, I guess. So that's a bit of where we come from, and I think, we have this drive to know things, and a lot of times that works out really well for us. We have a drive to discover new answers, to understand the world better, to understand how life works, whether that's nature or science or our own inner workings of our minds and relationships. We have a desire to know and understand. And a lot of that's good, but a lot of it requires us to put answers to things that don't always have answers. And then we believe, in turn, that we have all of the answers. Our church has put us in a place, not like Open Door leadership or something, but like our church over the last several centuries has put us in a place that requires answers, where we think that our purpose or our goal is to be able to answer all of the right questions. And it makes it tough when we realize we don't have all of the right answers. So dialogue is first an idea about us having a conversation in a circle of people getting together and having this conversation that is open-ended, that is collaborative in nature, that is not one versus the other. There are not winners and losers. There is simply open discussion, and hopefully, in the ideal in dialogue, you come together and create new answers together. You take some of ideas from one place and ideas from another, and they build each other up rather than competing till you find the best one. In life, what we've been calling, I don't know if this is a new term, probably not, but what we've been calling a posture of dialogue is this idea of us entering into life and space and relationships with an idea that we are going to discover, that we are going to collaborate, that we are going to listen, and this morning that we are going to ask questions. One of the great skills of any dialogue participant is not bringing to the table some never before thought out idea, but simply bringing questions with an inquisitive mind. In fact, the best minds in history have asked great questions, and sometimes they don't have answers. I listened to this one podcast called Radiolab. You should check it out. It's amazing. And every once in a while, they will bring up somebody in history that has thought about this amazing question, like, where do eels come from? Okay. Where do they come from? You think we might know, but for hundreds of years, we searched for, like, male and female eels, trying to figure out where they come from. Couldn't figure it out. Hundreds of years, okay? So a guy that asks the right question follows through with research over centuries to develop answers, which I find fascinating and brings to mind this idea that sometimes asking the right questions leads us to different places. May not surprise you to find out. I don't know that I share this. I definitely don't share it often, and I don't know if I've shared it here, but it may not surprise you to find out that when I was in high school, I was involved in this thing called teen court. In teen court, minors commit offenses, and then instead of going through a normal judicial process, they are given the opportunity to go to teen court, and you're like, where are we headed with this? They get the opportunity to go to teen court and get a trial with their peers and a jury, and the outcome is community service based on some guidelines and the jury, and then it gets wiped from your record. So small things, these are not major events, but small things, you can go to teen court. You get a traffic ticket, you steal, like petty theft, things that teenagers do. This is not a broad blanket statement that all teenagers steal, just putting it out there. Things that teenagers do, they can go to teen court and do this, contribute to the community. I found out about teen court because I went. I won't go into that. It was not that, that sounds bad, but it wasn't. And I was like, whoa, this is fascinating, because you have like high school kids that are representing you for a trial. They're working in the back room to work out deals that don't require trial, plea bargains and things. It's really quite fun. And then there's a lawyer or a real judge that actually presides over the court. It was awesome. So for a while, every Monday night, I think it was, I went to teen court, and first as a defendant, and then as a juror, and then as an attorney in teen court. And it's an interesting setting. Court in general is an interesting setting because it's supposed to be this place where we discover facts. But really, and I don't know if you've sat on a jury before or been a defendant, but really, in court, we discover that jurors and that often it's not the facts that matter as much as your feelings and your emotions. If you can get a jury to feel compassion for your client, you've done your job, regardless of what the facts are. If you can get those assumptions to take hold in a juror's mind, even though we don't necessarily have the facts or the concrete evidence to put it there. Sometimes that's what matters more than anything else. But in the courtroom, questions serve with this very specific purpose. And that's not always to discover the truth. And this is why I think this is I don't know if we're getting anywhere or not. But it's to help the witness tell a story. That's the purpose of the questions. And you need that story to come to life through the questioning. And on the other side, maybe, your purpose is not to have them tell a story, but your purpose is to confuse the story just enough to create doubt. We're watching this on grand scale right now in the U.S. House. And the questions have very specific purpose. You need the jury to believe the story that's being told. One specific week, I'd like to share just one story. I was defending a 16-year-old boy that had stolen an action figure from Walmart, I think. Now, it may not surprise you to find out that high school is kind of a rough world if you're into action figures. And it didn't matter that the action figure cost like $8. Because on the other side of the table, they were telling this story about this kid that was into action figures and was so into his action figures that he was willing to steal them. I was trying to convince the jury that it's only $8. So this penalty carries like 40 to 75 hours of community service. Remind you, the jury is full of kids that have gone through similar situations. Just a rough guess whether we were on the 40 or the 75-hour end when that jury came to conclusion. Anyone? 40. So 40 is where you would expect facts to lead you, but 75 is where the lack of emotional connection to this young boy met. Because it wasn't about the facts, it was about how they connected with a defendant or with a witness. Questions in this setting lead us to tell stories. Very early on, I was told, don't ever ask a question you don't know an answer to. And you can watch this in public hearings now. You can watch attorneys ask questions, and they know exactly what the answer is. The point is not discovery. That's where we're going with. This point is not to get the facts out of somebody. They know the answers. The questions are creating this space to tell the story, and they would not dare take a chance on not knowing what that witness is about to say. Regardless, questions allow us to shape meaning or discover meaning. They allow us to ask open or closed questions or to discover in an open or closed way. So in a courtroom, we discover in a very closed way. You can't lead a witness, but you can ask very direct questions with very specific answers. They can send us down rabbit holes of truth or allow us to roam free in a place of mystery and awe. Closed questions create closed answers. And open questions invite dialogue, intrigue, and collaboration. In our faith, we have often attempted to ask and answer closed questions. Is there a real Adam and Eve? Did the whole earth flood or part of it? Was Noah a thing, or is there some other story? We ask very specific questions with very specific answers that can help us determine everything else we're going to say, do, or believe. So for many, that specific question is one that tells us whether we're going to believe in Jesus 2,000 years later. It's not 2. It's 0 to 2, 5, whatever. That specific question tells us whether we're going to find all of the Bible true or untrue. You see, closed questions create closed answers and end our conversations, end our dialogue, whether that's internal or external. I think about this, and we did a series a few years ago just on questions. I just want to show you. I just want to show you this. I know you can't really see it, or not that it really matters. This is Gospel Parallels. Has anybody used one of these before? No. They're quite interesting. There's a few on the market. I particularly like this one because of the version that it's using. But it takes Matthew, Mark, and Luke, known as the Synoptic Gospels, and places them in columns so that you can see what did Matthew write, and since there's so much correlation, what did then Mark write and what did Luke write? That's the order of these in this one. And so you can see here we are in the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, and you've got Matthew here. Mark doesn't include this at all in the text, and then Luke on the other side. Or say, let's see. Here we go. Matthew chapter 3. Actually, Mark picks up where Matthew has already been working for 3 chapters. Mark picks up at the beginning, so we have Matthew 3, but Mark 1 and Luke chapter 3. And so you see some of the organization and the way the things flow. We can't even put John in this because John's like way out in another world of things. But here's what's interesting I find about this, and we'll take the Beatitudes specifically in just a second. I think it's lost. What's interesting about these is that as we developed our text, the Bible, we placed these stories side by side by side. Over time, it became more advantageous to us to write succinctly and one story. And so right now, in addition to finding something like this on the market, which simply places them side by side, you can also find something called a harmonized gospel. Is that a familiar term? In a harmonized gospel, they've taken all Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they've put them together to make one story. The problem is that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell their stories differently, putting same stories like feeding of the 5,000, telling it slightly differently, say John, the feeding of the 4,000, and in a different location in the story of Jesus' life. So for Matthew, who tells the Sermon on the Mount, in chapter 5, Luke is going to begin that story in chapter 6 and tell pieces of it, but then pieces of that Sermon on the Mount, which is Sermon in the Plain in Luke, actually shows up later in chapter 14. And still other pieces show up in chapter 16 and elsewhere. The point is not that these stories are told differently. The point is that the early church was comfortable putting 3 different stories of Jesus, although many similarities, 4 different stories of Jesus, even with many similarities, right next to each other. With our scientific method, we read through and go, either he's not right or he's not right. Sorry, they're both all 4 male. Something isn't right here with these 2 stories, and we go, well, who's right? Or we say, better, how can we make those 2 stories fit together? Because we have to have answers that make sense. And we can't have something with open-ended questions. The early church was comfortable putting these texts next to each other. I'm going to argue because they were comfortable with some open-ended questions. And it was okay to have Luke and John side by side in our text, even though they tell wildly different points about who Jesus was and how we think about faith and God and life. Ultimately, the similarities certainly outweigh the differences. But in our finer details, in our closed answer kinds of questions, did the flood cover the whole earth? We have to answer things like, is Luke right or is John right? And it forces us into closed answers. Now, we don't acknowledge that as a legitimate question for the most part, which is fine. But the early church didn't do it on an accident. They were intentional about what was happening. And it leaves open questions, open for discovery, open for a journey, open for faith to grow and develop in mystery and in awe. You see, too often, we close the book and we close our eyes. We close our ears to others and we go on about our way with our own opinion, our own ideas, and our own belief set. And if anything is amiss, we just create a new denomination. No problem. Thousands, tens of thousands of denominations. And of course, it's hard sometimes to have theological differences and to continue on our journey of faith together. But a posture of dialogue, a place of dialogue, if in fact that is our goal, I'd say that's an open question, but if in fact that is our goal, puts opposing ideas into this mixture together and allows us to work together to create a journey that grows stronger, not weaker. The scientific method has been disastrous for churches because we love it. As much as we like to debate science, we love the scientific method because we can walk through our text, we can walk through our faith and go, yes, no, yes, that's right, that's not right, that's right, and come to our simple conclusion, and then we can preach that simple conclusion. We love the scientific method as much as we hate science. That's not an official policy. I don't hate science. We love it, though, because it creates closed answers and simple solutions. Dialogue is hard. It is hard to get together, to disagree, to have differing points of view, to be open to new ideas and to discovery. Questions should create that. And Jesus spoke in questions. If we read through the Gospels and the many different forms that we have, we find Jesus asking questions to aid others in their discovery. Sometimes it's very lawyerly and very pointed, knowing there's only one answer. At other times, he asks questions like, Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. No, but do you love me? Yes, I love you. But do you love me? And I think by the third time, the wheels have to be spinning in his mind going, what does it mean to love Jesus? At least that's what happens in mine. Because it requires an openness to what's actually being asked. Or in another scenario, rich young ruler in one instance, authority something in another. It says, "Good teacher." And he asks Jesus a question. And Jesus says, "Why do you call me good?" Wait a second. Why would I not call you good? What am I supposed to do with that? How do I answer that question? He doesn't answer the question. But Jesus evokes discovery, rarely giving specific answers, always asking you to dig deeper, over and over and over, questioning the law, questioning assumptions, questioning positions of authority, religious and political. Over and over, Jesus invites us to ask deeper questions. And over, we return to Jesus a simple, closed question. In that rich young ruler, he says, "But what do I need to do to have eternal life?" And Jesus gives him an answer, and he says, "But I've done that. Now what do I need to do?" We return a difficult, open-ended question, "Why do you call me good?" with a very specific, closed question, "But what do I have to do? Tell me the concrete answer." Because we love the concrete answers. But anyone writing on the mysteries and vastness of God's love and grace and compassion cannot write in concrete answers. Always requires an open-ended mystery and awe about the greatness or the vastness or the hows or the whys. But those questions are hard. And that's okay. I've tried throughout these conversations to mix in some idea about asking questions and the way faith tends to work in the world with some real practical, this is how we open up our engagement of others in this very dichotomous world that life has turned into. And with those, we've talked about creating space, and that's a mental space, creating space to find mystery, to be open to discovery, to be explorative in the way that we walk through our day and into conversation, the willingness and openness to collaborate. That we risk being wrong, that we risk and have the willingness to risk stability in our own understanding of the way things are. That we listen to others with reverent attention, giving them dignity, not just in being present, but also in the way that we listen and in asking questions that are open and being prepared to not close questions with answers. I know those are all somewhat still like this up in the air kind of idea. But next week when we come together to actually do this, those are four things that we want to be aware of when we come to the table to have conversation, that we are focused on being present for these things. It's also come to my attention in some conversations with you about these is that we are presented every single day with public opportunities for debate, and for discussion, remember, related to concussion and percussion, that we are exposed to these things every single day in politics, on Facebook, even in high school with debate clubs and teen courts. We are presented with the opportunity to know and understand and view the world through debate every day. Dialogue requires us to step outside of those assumed ways that world functions to collaborate. So next week we're going to try it. I hope you come back. Might be the smallest number since 2012. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I hope you come back. And in the meantime, and even going out from there, the idea isn't simply for us to have these moments where we get together and we talk differently, but is to approach life differently, that we can be in a headspace of dialogue. That's the idea. Anyway, let's close with a prayer, and then Peter will lead us, and maybe Nathan. I don't know. Thank you both for playing. Nathan on the fly, only at Open Door. Yeah, let's pray. God, we are thankful to be here with you this morning and with one another. We know that it is difficult to communicate effectively in our world, that we have agendas, that we have opinions, that we have assumptions about others and even ourselves. We ask that you will lead us in a way and guide us in a way that we can be open to others, that we can listen reverently, that we can learn how to ask questions that discover and that are open and that bring life, as opposed to questions that close down, disengage, and remove us from the journey of growth. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Thanks for listening to this sermon podcast from Open Door Church. Our intro and outro music was created by Lee Rosevear and is used under a Creative Commons by attribution license. Have a great week. Ask the hard questions and explore God's love. Everyone is always welcome to join the journey with us at Open Door. Learn more at opendoorfamily.ca. That's opendoorfamily.ca.